All right. Here is a Kirk Cousins question for you in relation to Everson Griffin announcing that he is leaving the Minnesota Vikings, which just feels so weird. I mean, for the longest time, the guy has been a staple of this great defense. And since I got here, I mean, the first guy that you're sort of impressed by when you look at him, like, whoa, and then you watch him on tape is Everson Griffin when you think of this Vikings defense. And to have him gone, it feels like the heart taken out of this defense in some
Yeah.
ways. If I told you before the offseason started, so go back to like end of Mahomes throws the touchdown, it's over, and the Super Bowl ends, and then I tell you, yeah, a few months from now, you will have no defensive players outside of Daniil Hunter, Harrison Smith, maybe Anthony Harris, but probably not, and Eric Hendricks and Anthony Barr. That's it. That's your whole defense. And oh yeah, by the way, Stefon Diggs, yeah, he's traded for a draft
Yeah.
pick. At that point, would you, Myron, have said, you know what they should really do is sign Kirk Cousins to a contract extension? And I'm sorry if I've said this in a leading way, but the answer seems obvious to me that you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't, and I think you'd be shocked. Not by Diggs though. Like I mean, I don't know that the Diggs thing would have surprised me that much, just because we've been there to some degree. You've heard the rumblings. Maybe he's not happy, but the defensive pieces that would have been shocking. Like, wait a minute, you're losing everybody? How? You know? So you definitely wouldn't sign Kirk Cousins to an extension under those circumstances because why do you have to? Like what are you gaining when instability is already here and you know you're going to be in a position where you have to make some significant moves here in 2021? Like, what do you gain by signing to him to an extension if you understand that that's what's going to happen with your team, Collar? I mean, it would have been illogical and ludicrous to make that decision if you had known that the defense was going to lose those key pieces and you were going to lose Diggs.
And this is why I think that they thought it was going to go differently because they signed Cousins to create cap space, which you couldn't sign the guys anyway. And they left and you were forced to trade Stefon Diggs, which is just not a win for you. If you're
Yes.
trying to win in 2020, it's not a win to take one of the best players in the NFL and send him out for the 22nd pick and a handful of other picks. It's just that's not good for immediate victory. Probably isn't good for long-term victory either. But
no, it's victory in general. It doesn't help victory in
no,
general.
getting rid of a player that good usually doesn't work out well for anybody. But I look at it as if you know that you're going to have to rebuild the entire team, then you just let this thing play out. And maybe you even draft a quarterback. So I was thinking, racking my brain for examples of this, and I think this one is relevant. The Philadelphia Eagles with Sam Bradford. So they get Sam Bradford out of desperation to get the most out of the last year of Chip Kelly, which of course it doesn't go super well, and Chip Kelly ends up fired. But they went out and got a quarterback from somewhere else. They signed Bradford. He comes in. He actually plays really well. You look back at that season, especially the second half of the season for Sam Bradford in Philly. I mean, it's good, but they looked at it and they said, well, this guy's not our long-term quarterback, though, because of the knee, of course, and that's not a Kirk Cousins issue, but also because it's Sam Bradford. Like, there's probably a ceiling on what you can do with Sam Bradford, and the cost when his contract was coming up was going to be pretty significant. So what they decided to do was move on, get Carson Wentz, bring him in, and then rebuild the rest of the roster around him. So it was already a decent team roster-wise that Sam Bradford went, 7-8 or 8-8 with. But then they hand that team over that's in pretty good shape to Carson Wentz and then build around Wentz. And a couple of years later, they're in the Super Bowl. It doesn't always work out that way, but I think it's an example of a team that got a mercenary quarterback who was very good at football, but said, nah, we need to have the rookie quarterback contract here if we're really going to take this to the next level. And I don't think that Bradford can really do it. If they had taken that route, if they knew they were going to have to rebuild so many pieces on this defense and even now on the offensive line at wide receiver, then I think it would have been a route endorsed by most Vikings fans to just take it into 2020, see what happens, and then rebuild it back up from there.
Yeah, let me just say, I would watch a documentary about healthy Sam Bradford in the NFL and what he did he was like, I'm an old wrestling fan, man. He was like the reigning intercontinental champion, never the champ, the world champ, but just a guy who could always play at that level when healthy. And he just helped a lot of teams that all seemed to be in the same situation, and they turned to Sam Bradford. I don't know who that Sam Bradford is now, but yeah, ideally you would have someone like that. At the end of the day, considering the situation, it feels like this is something we would all agree on right now, right, Collar? You're paying too much money for that quarterback in this situation. Is that accurate?
Oh, of
Is that
course. Yeah, of
right?
course. Well, that's kind of my point is that if you're a rebuilding team, this actually would have been like if the Jets had signed Cousins. Remember, it was
Yeah.
Jets and Vikings, but the Jets were trying to rebuild their roster. If they signed Kirk Cousins, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense at the time. That's the point. Is it's not even about Cousins as a player. It's about where you are as a team does not scream sign a 30-something-year-old quarterback to a massive contract. It did a week ago, but now it doesn't. In 2018, it made so much sense. I'm not saying that I completely endorsed it, but like it made a lot of sense to bring in Kirk Cousins and pay him and drop him into a roster that had just been to the NFC Championship. I got that line of thinking. But signing him to an extension now is like signing him, essentially, right? It's like
Yeah.
getting him as a free agent. But you wouldn't do that. I mean, if this was somebody else, if I told you this was somebody else and not Kirk Cousins that they had signed for this much money, another, so-so quarterback, let's say it's Jared Goff, like they traded for
Yeah.
Jared Goff. Would you that right? Like, would you have
That'd be
traded for
ridiculous.
Jared Goff now?
No.
It sounds ridiculous, but you kind of did that.
But I think we also got to go back a couple years and talk about who we thought Kirk Cousins was, right? I think at his ceiling, we thought that Kirk Cousins could be the answer for a team that appeared to be contending, right? And that's a
Yes.
smart thing to do, because it seemed like he was the answer, a step above Case Keenum, and he could get you there. The one thing that wasn't discussed maybe enough was what was the harm in potentially knowing Kirk Cousins' history and that there weren't really any guarantees, and having a young, cheap, rookie quarterback right there. And I'll go back to Lamar Jackson. I know nobody saw it. A lot of you saw it. I mean, you talked about Lamar Jackson.
I was going to say,
Um,
we talked ad nauseum about Lamar Jackson, but go on with your point.
but imagine if you make that decision.
I'm pimping that home run forever, by the way. I'll never stop telling people about how much I love Lamar Jackson.
And you were right. And imagine if you got that guy. The Ravens were in a similar situation, right?
Yes.
They had Joe
absolutely.
Flacco, who had won a Super Bowl, and it was clear he wasn't the guy he'd been a couple years earlier. So you get this young guy at the back of the first round, and you go, guess what? If he turns out to be great, amazing. If not, we didn't spend that much on him. I mean, first round pick's a big deal, but at least you got Flacco who can carry you the rest of the way until you find a replacement. And then they make the move, and he's right there ready to go. With the Vikings, you go, there's no one right there, and you don't know where that quarterback might be. If you are able to attract another guy who's even in Kirk Cousins' league. Like look at the market right now. There are so many quarterbacks on the market who are available, who have sort of been able to pick and choose their spots. They have so much power in this current situation. But I don't know that if the Vikings had an opening right now, if there's a guarantee they'd get one of those top caliber guys. They're just in a tough spot, man. And you need Kirk Cousins to be great at the end of the day, because that's what you've invested in, and that's your only real hope. And I don't know. I mean, how many teams have really gotten that much better through the draft? Like, is the draft an overrated idea in terms of teams being able to use the draft solely to make massive improvements? I mean, history suggests that that's not a great idea, right? In most situations,
it is and it isn't. If you have a 2015 draft on your hands, then it is.
yes.
But if you don't, then it isn't. I mean, it's how lucky do you get? Because so here's the reality of the draft, and I'd love people to do this for themselves because now we have ways to save files and keep them forever and things like this. So do a draft sim and then email it to yourself and then go look at it 3 years from now, or go look at it every year and just see how much better or worse you are than the Minnesota Vikings at drafting. My guess is it's not that different. And they have to know who the players are. They have to know their fits. That I'm not saying like blow up a scouting department or anything like that. What I'm saying is you've got the list. You know who the guys are. You know what their skills are. And then you're just hoping. You're just thinking maybe this works out for you. Maybe the draft board falls the right way. Maybe, a Stefon Diggs ends up in the 5th round and you get supremely lucky. But for the most part, if you were saying, can you count on the draft to save your butt? Like, no, not really. It
Yeah.
has to go really well for you. And that's what happened over these last few years. It went really, really stupid well for the Vikings to get all these great players. But is it going to happen again? And does your coach and general manager feel like they even have the time to let that play out? Because it might take 2 drafts, it might take 3 drafts before you really get all these players filled up again at these positions. And they don't feel like they have time for that. And this was another question that came to my mind earlier this week. And now I think the answer is even more clear, that if your coach and general manager were on 10-year contracts and they were 100% locked in job security, would they have signed Cousins? And how would they have approached this from the very beginning? I can't see a way that they re-sign Cousins to an extension that soon. Now, if he goes to the Super Bowl in 2020 with a ragtag
Different
roster,
story.
then great, man. He was amazing. But I think you wouldn't have jumped right away to make it one of your first moves on Monday to sign him to a contract extension to desperately create cap space.
Well, and especially in this market too. I mean, I don't know. Now you've got Zimmer and Spielman making decisions that someone else might have to live with, right? That's the concern now is you bring in a new regime next summer, and maybe they look at Cousins and go, okay, that's not the guy we want at that position, and now you're scrambling. Certainly, I think Zimmer and Spielman think, okay, it's hard to find a good quarterback, which it is. It is difficult to find a good quarterback in the NFL. I mean, this year is a bit different. The fact that Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers and Tom Brady and guys like Winston who threw for 5,000 yards, but throwing 30 picks, that guys like that might not even have a job, a starting job in the league next year. Cam Newton trying to figure out if he's going to have a starting job. This feels like a rare pool of talent. This isn't the norm. What seems to be more normal is to have a guy like Kirk Cousins maybe being the big fish of a free agent pool when it comes to quarterback. And that's just a gamble. That's always going to be a gamble. And that's the situation that seems like they might be headed toward all over again. Kirk Cousins doesn't work out. You sign him to the extension. You replace Zimmer and Spielman. And now you're doing this dance all over again, man. And I will say this. I'm someone that's, Pope Vikings fans, being from Wisconsin, growing up a Packers fan. I understand that as Packers fans, they get to kind of do a little bit of that. But being here for as long as I've been, like I understand the frustration with this fan base. And it's like watching this movie play over and over again. And I can understand how you would feel like this is all unfair. Like, why is everybody else getting better? Like, why does Teddy Bridgewater get to go to Carolina and Tom Brady's going to Tampa Bay and all these other moves are being made where teams are getting better this offseason, but looks like we're getting worse? That's got to be a frustrating feeling, Colin.